At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that follows the money behind the beautiful game, which frankly at the moment has been a bit like hide and seek. Kieran's following the money. I'm Kevin Dale. I'm joined by football finance expert at Liverpool University, Kieran Magoo, which is, I presume our producer was in a hurry typing because that's what he's put. I'm joined by Kieran Magoo, M-A-G-U. So welcome, Mr.
Thank you very much. I've been called far worse.
Yes, you have. Well, we won't be calling I won't be calling you any names on the pod now for a reason you'll just be able to find out. And Kieran won't be swearing so much either because he's been told off by a new listener, which is Kieran's mum. Who's listening to us over there in lovely County Mayo. And Kieran's mum's other note is that she wants to hear more from me on the pod. Fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of this actual pod. But hello, Kieran's mum. I will keep an eye on the swearing, and I've pleaded with him to keep some of the stories out of future pods. Kieran's mum doesn't need to know about the special cuddles. But beautiful County Mayo. Now it's Monday today, I believe. To be perfectly honest, if you hadn't tweeted that we were about to record the pod, I'd still be in the kitchen drinking tea, as I'd forgotten it was Sunday. So it is Monday. We're recording on Sunday, but it's Monday today. So we're all about your questions. It's questions day today, but we'll also hear from the chief executive of Luton Town, Gary Sweet, who sat down with Kieran safely from a distance, of course, on Thursday night. I presume club chief execs enjoy talking to you, Kieran, don't they? A language you understand, which presumably why I wasn't asked to join in this particular Zoom.
He was very candid, and then 12 hours later he went and sacked the manager. Yes.
Oh, did he?
so I don't know whether it was something I'd said. I hope not. I hope not for Graham Jones's behalf.
Oh, my Lord. Okay, well, I'll listen to the interview like everybody with you and then find out if there are any subconscious clues, like sack the manager played backwards. Let's a couple of coronavirus updates before we get into the questions. First coronavirus update from Kieran and I is please don't inject bleach or light into any of your veins, no matter what a particular level of world leaders asked you to do this week. Avoid that. That's our little. Take that one from us free. That tip. I still the idea of injecting light. I'm maybe he's working on levels we don't understand. The Dutch League has now been cancelled. The Belgian League was first to go. The Dutch League has followed. It's the Eredivisie. I know you've been practicing the pronunciation, but it's a bigger league. It's probably the first of the major European leagues to make this decision.
Yes, it's followed on from Belgium and now the Eredivisie, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And what they've effectively said is that there's no champions and there's no relegation. And this has caused some ructions in respect of the second division of the Eredivisie because I've forgotten the name of the side, but I think they were 11 points ahead. So they were pretty sore, but they're pretty sore in a very phlegmatic Dutch way. They say, well, this is sad, but ultimately it's a public health issue, and we're just in the entertainment industry. They have allocated the Champions League places to the top two teams in the division, and similar for Europa League with no complications and relatively little fuss as well.
Yeah, the Dutch are a very laid-back nation, aren't they, for very many reasons. Is their league constituted like ours? I mean, will there be? Does it belong to the clubs that are in that league? Will all the clubs in the Eredivisie have voted on this, or do they have a formal management structure?
It was a democratic decision. What happens is that they were due to have a meeting actually 2 or 3 weeks ago, which I was supposed to be talking myself with regards to the finances of European football. And clearly matters have accelerated since then. The Dutch government has said there's no chance of large-scale public meetings taking place until at least September. And under those circumstances, they've just said, well, we can't finish the season. Let's just call the whole thing off.
Is this contrary to UEFA's advice? Remind me.
Well, UEFA have effectively delegated the decisions to individual countries. And they said, in an ideal world, we want matches to be finished, but we are prepared to listen to individual countries making decisions. And unless they do anything which is particularly crazy, the chances are we'll simply back them.
For what we're both hearing, I believe there's still a complete determination to complete fixtures here in England, and we've finally had what we believed confirmed that the PL and the AFL, the EFL even, have been meeting government on a regular basis to try and resolve the issue of unfinished games, haven't they? Yes,
I think the government has these 5 tests. And it's fairly clear that there has to be prioritisation for healthcare workers and people working on the front line in terms of access to testing. It has been estimated that it could take up to 100,000 tests for the remaining EFL games to be completed. That was in one of the papers. So, clearly there would be a very big cost involved, but compared to the loss of TV money and compared to the loss of revenue from promotion and the potential lawsuits, it's something which they can bear. In terms of how clubs are going to be promoted, clearly no decision has been made as yet, and I think that is the correct decision. There's various things being thrown into the fire, such as clubs just being promoted and nobody being relegated. And also there's the idea of a mini playoff system where the top 8 teams in each of the Championship, League 1 and League 2, go into a playoff competition. So the first would play 8th, second would play 7th, and so on. And then that would effectively form a knockout. And that's if matches can't take place in terms of fulfilling the remaining 9 fixtures and then potentially 3 playoff games for the clubs involved. So that would be a lot quicker. But that would only be the case if we are making no progress with regards to matches taking place behind closed doors.
Yeah, and presumably we touched on this briefly before, Kieran. In the Premier League, for example, it will take 2 games tops for Liverpool to become champions, and the chances are that the bottom 3 teams could be relegated within, say, 5 or 6 rounds. So if you then took the imaginative decision to spread the rest of the prize money between the clubs, 4 down, there's no reason why you can't just play enough games to resolve the outstanding issues rather than all the games to finish the season, is there really?
There is that, but I think we need, from an integrity point of view, we need some clarity in advance, because otherwise, if the club's in the middle of the division, so we're talking Burnley, Palace, West Ham, well not West Ham, but Burnley, Palace, and so on. If they know that they're going to get a set amount of money, and at present, remember, you are getting an extra £2.5 million per place. So that does certainly keeps the finance director and the chief executive excited, and players are on bonuses based on final league positions. So if they know that all the money is just going to be split evenly between, say, 4th and 17th, that might cause issues once you know that actually we've got nothing to play for, and then you are playing some of the bottom 6. So you're away to Bournemouth or Villa. Are you going to bust a gut during those matches? So until we get some form of certainty, I don't think it would work to have a season where we effectively give the title to Liverpool. They deserve it, as we know, without matches taking place to the full.
Yeah, I know your answer to that question, and the reason I asked is because I wanted to hear your mother to hear you use the word integrity, that'd be my point is that once say you play 6 rounds of games, and I'm talking about safety and about getting the next season started. If after 6 rounds of games, Liverpool are champions and the bottom 3 are relegated, my point is then, is there any point playing the final 3 round of games, which essentially will only be to decide whether Palace get £2.5 million more than West Ham? And then my point is then, once it's all decided, then surely the clubs can say, look, we're still taking risks with stewards, with police, with match announcers, with players, etc. So now all the issues are done. Let's just spread that prize money and split that. That's my point. Not that you say that only the bottom three or the bottom five play the games necessary, but you play as many games as you need, and once it's decided, then you can stop and start preparing for next season.
I think that's very fair comment. But remember, we've also got Champions League places to take into consideration. And I suspect there could be a bit of a bun fight. Not only because of the fact that we don't know whether the side finishing 4th or 5th will be our final Champions League entrant. And there's quite a scramble for 5th place. But yeah, I agree with you in principle. If we know that there's no potential further movement for Champions League, Europa League, promotion relegation, or rather champion relegation, then just finish playing football. You're absolutely right. We shouldn't be putting people at risk. I thought Gary Neville's comments during the week were very good in the sense that if it's not going to be fit and proper for fans to attend matches because of a public health risk, I, as an employer, have a responsibility towards my staff, including the players, to not put them at risk from a health perspective, and therefore surely I can't go out and let them play football. Yeah,
no, it's a very good. I mean, I think that's a question a lot of people have asked. You can social distance in the ground, of course you can. It's an empty ground. You move the dugouts a few meters away from each other. But football's a contact sport, so as you say, and people get hurt, people get cut. So we're still not entirely sure how this thing gets spread. So Gary Neville, I reluctantly concede, makes a very fair point. So let's get on to the questions, because we do have some good questions this week. Now, the first question pretty much cuts to the heart of what we've been talking about. We spent the last 2 weeks talking about various Premier League clubs, Champions League, Championship clubs, and wage cuts, players taking 10%, 12.5% wage cuts. John Burr has simply asked, how does this work? How does it work in practice? Will money be deducted at source? Will players be paid and then asked to give some back? What's the practical side of the wage cut?
Well, what would happen is that when the payroll run is done, and remember that's taking place this week, players will be paid in the next few days, which is why so many clubs are scrambling round trying to sort out deals at present. All that you will do is just literally multiply each wage packet by 80%, 87.5% and so on, and the system will automatically churn out the gross and the net and so on. Now, if the money is being furloughed, you'll have to do a separate calculation for that, but that'll just be run on a payroll system. So it's just spreadsheet fun and games, and clearly the player will then get his pay slip sometime later this week with the revised sum involved.
Everything's spreadsheet fun and games to you, isn't it?
Yes.
Spreadsheet Fun and Games will be the name of your annual when it comes out. Viz has got the Profanosaurus, Kieran Maguire's Spreadsheet Fun and Games. So HMRC will automatically be informed of this via the payroll system.
That's right. So what will happen is, as far as the first team squad and of course all of the other members of staff are concerned, you work out your gross payroll cost, how much of that goes as a deduction. And some of the issues which have been raised by the PFA are actually quite valid. If you have owners of clubs such as Chelsea or Manchester City who are willing to bankroll the players during the pandemic, the only losers here are HMRC, because the owners are quite happy to fund it. The players are, of course, more than happy to receive their full wage. And so what are we doing this for? Is it just to make people feel slightly better about themselves who are not professional footballers?
Yeah. Well, it's a PR exercise to get the tabloids off their back, unfortunately. As a freelancer, I really miss the days of getting that monthly pay slip. But I also really like the idea of your suggestion, which, God bless you, that Premier League footballers are still looking at their payslip. Really, I like David Silver. Hang on a second, where's that deduction come from? Really, that's hilarious. Jack Painter is our next question. Good name. Now, this is a very good question, Jack, actually, and it kind of refers to chaos theory in a strange sort of way. A few years ago, you may recall there was a lot of talk about restructuring the league system, and people saying it's not quite working the way it was. And one of those big suggestions was that we had the Premier League and then 4 divisions of 20 below that. So the National League would disappear. You'd have 4 divisions in the league below the Premier League. And Jack says maybe now this is the time, out of this chaos, perhaps this is the time to think outside the box and maybe use this as an opportunity to say, well, we could restructure the league out of this. Does he have a point?
I think restructuring the league is certainly something worthwhile discussing. In terms of a 20-team league, if I went to the EFL today and say, hey guys, presently you're playing 46 times a year and you've got the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup. By the way, the Carabao Cup's going to be binned because it is going to be binned. It just hasn't been confirmed. And I'm going to reduce your number of league matches to 38 a year, but you're already losing money, and I'm going to reduce the number of paydays by 8 a year minimum. It's a non-starter. The clubs in the Premier League, whilst the Premier League has fewer clubs than the EFL, remember, seven of the Premier League clubs are playing in Champions League and Europa League as well. They tend to go further in the cup competitions than the EFL clubs. So actually, they quite often end up playing more fixtures than the EFL clubs anyway. The EFL clubs are more dependent upon match day income than the Premier League. So to take away 4 home matches from each of them, it simply is a non-starter. And that's excluding the pandemic. You throw the pandemic into the equation, where the clubs are potentially playing matches, having to pay out wages and getting no money coming in. I think whilst there's always a case for looking at football from a holistic point of view, this one wouldn't work.
You talk about the Carabao Cup there. Do you think this is the end of the line for the Carabao Cup, full stop, not just the next couple of seasons? Because also there's talk of the new European, well, essentially Carabao Cup competition, isn't it? So I presume that's going to be put on the back burner for a while as well.
I think the Europa Cup League, or whatever, or the Europa Trophy, or whatever they're going to call it, I think that's they are very keen to start that. Because that will allow, if you think about that, UEFA's got 55 member associations. That will provide income for some of those smaller countries. So the likes of Slovakia, the likes of Albania, who don't normally have sides who are necessarily good enough to get into the qualifying or the group stages of Champions League and Europa League. This will provide them with an extra revenue stream. The reason why I'm suspicious about the Carabao Cup is I have heard 1 or 2 stories from within the game, but also if we do move to an expanded Champions League, which is going to involve 12 group games, you simply can't fit things in the existing calendar.
I would have thought for the next 2 or 3 seasons at least, there'd be some lack of confidence about travelling abroad en masse, wouldn't there?
Yes, if we can't travel 12 times a year, you can't travel 6 times a year. So I think it has to be an all or nothing in terms of playing matches in Europe. Okay,
now our next question comes from Glenn Entwistle. Now, Glenn Entwistle was a Blackburn fan, and I don't know why I was so perversely delighted that somebody called Entwistle supported a Lancashire team. It just seemed right somehow. I feel that I should apologise to Glenn right from the top here, because Glenn basically says we've unearthed in him a previously unknown fascination for football finances, basically. And he rather plaintively says that he spent Easter Sunday creating his own recent history of Blackburn's financial accounts. I'm so sorry, Glenn. Rasputin in the corner of my screen is laughing, chuckling away there because he's lured another one into his web of deceit. But anyway. You are like the child catcher, aren't you? You just wander around with a net, spotting vulnerable young men and women as they come into the accountancy club. Now, Glenn's question is a good one, because, again, we've talked a lot. You've told us a lot, Kieran, about what sustainable wages aren't. You've always given us good examples. So Glenn's question is, for a championship club, what is a proper sustainable wage as a percentage of turnover? Presumably anything below 100%, but there are other costs to offset against that. So, you told us recently about Reading, I think, who for every £100 coming in are spending £137 on player wages. So Glenn's question simply is, what should the figure be?
Well, I think Reading were actually 224. They've now stolen the Guinness Book of Records championship from Harry Redknapp, and that's quite an achievement. So
I shall leave the producer and the lawyer to work out whether or not we can put that in, but I'm happy with it. I'm perfectly happy with it.
Yeah, it's perfectly true. Harry Redknapp and Birmingham City did have the previous record, that's all.
Okay. Yeah.
UEFA have what they refer to as a red flag, and they say that if you are spending more than £70 in wages for every £100 of income, you're moving on to a bit of a sticky wicket. So that's their guideline. So it's not a red line. It's not you shouldn't do this, but you should try to keep it below 70. Now, if we take a look at the Premier League, the Premier League varies between 39 and 85, and then when you move into the Championship, the average is 107. So it's just sheer lunacy in that particular division. And clearly, Glenn's comments are that Blackburn are around about 140, 150 from what I recall, and that was in both League One and the Championship last season. So you can see his cause for concern. And no doubt he's crunched the numbers himself. If he'd emailed me, I've got the history of Blackburn. I've got the history of everybody, as you probably know. I could have sent him and saved him. He could have spent Easter Sunday eating Easter eggs.
Yeah, Glenn, you can email him, Glenn. You'll never get out if you do. I'm just telling you, it's your decision. Fine. Now, our next question is from Roy Nassay. Roy says, "This is the best pod ever. You've made football finance staggeringly interesting." Thank you, Roy. How are the girls, by the way? I should, in the interest of fairness, I should point out that I know Roy. Roy's a very old friend of mine, and Roy is the sort of person who would find you staggeringly interesting, Kieran. I'd say he used to look like Donny Osmond when he was young. He thinks he still does. Unfortunately, he's quite a handsome young fella. He drove me to my first ever gig. And he's got an allotment now. That's how he changed.
That is rock and roll.
He went from being a handsome young man to we were taking the piss out of him. He's making a fortune out of he's the courgettes. And also it's very sweet of Roy that knowing me as well as he does, and I've known him since our first day at secondary school. He went through the proper channels with his question. He didn't just text me. He went through the proper channels, and Roy understands finance as well. I should point out, and also, God bless him, just spent 6 weeks in Galway looking after his mum. I'll just throw that in for Mrs. Maguire's benefit. That some boys have been out over looking after their old mums over there. Not that your mum's old in any way, shape or form. I apologise, Mrs. Maguire. From what I understand, she's quite a forthright woman, so I wouldn't like to call her old in public, basically. And now Roy's question is about dividends, and we're using Daniel Levy as an example here, and Daniel's massive payout recently, which you talked about. And this is an interesting question, basically. Roy said, "How is it decided? Is it a fixed percentage based on shareholdings, or does Daniel decide how much he gets? Is there a scenario where the shareholders could take all the net profits as a dividend?"
In theory, yes, they could, but it would leave them nothing to reinvest in the club. So if you look at all companies, they very rarely take all of the profits of a dividend, except, of course, the company which bought the bowling ground from West Ham. They bought it for 40 million. They sold it for 60 million. They paid £4 million in cash. They paid themselves a £16 million dividend, and then they just disappeared. But normally companies will reinvest profits back into the business to allow the business to grow. So there's no set formula. In the Premier League, even Spurs, and they are a club that make profits every single year, they don't pay dividends to the owners, and the owners effectively are Daniel Levy and Joe Lewis. Joe Lewis lives in the Bahamas. He's worth £8 billion. He doesn't need 3 or 4 million a year from Spurs. The only club that's paying a dividend at present is Manchester United, and they pay around about £22 million a year out of their profits to shareholders, of course, of whom the Glazers are significant beneficiaries.
As so often happens, can I just take you back to a slight diversion at the start of that question? The company that have paid themselves a lot of money, the Boleyn Holding Company, whatever you said they were called. This is a company that still trades, is it?
No, this company's now wound itself up. It literally came from nowhere, bought the Boleyn, sold the Boleyn a couple of days later, paid the tax on the deal, paid itself a 16 million dividend, and then said, right, we're off.
And that's all. I hesitate to ask this. That's all okay illegally?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's perfectly legitimate.
Okay. I suspect we might be getting tweets about that small snippet of information, but we'll carry on for now because it's a Monday, so technically it's a shorter pod. The next question is from a friend of Roy's, funnily enough. Thank you for that question, Roy. The next question is from a friend of Roy, a chap called Kevin Day, basically. He's a big fan of your work, Kieran. So you just explained how the dividends work. For a club like Man City and potentially Newcastle in the next few weeks, who are owned by some of the richest people in the world, do they work on the same dividend basis? Are they paying themselves a dividend, or do they just leave it where it is and let it accumulate interest?
No, you can only pay a dividend if you have accumulated profits over the years. Right. So if you take a look at Manchester City, they've actually lost 700-800 million since UAE took over. It's similar with Abramovich and Chelsea. That's about 1.5 billion of losses. So until you reverse all of those losses and you start actually going in the black, it's a bit like if you're overdrawn £100 and you put in £20, you're still overdrawn. So until you move back into having a positive bank balance, you can't pay out a dividend. In terms of Newcastle, I would suspect they're going to be losing money under the new owners, who will be going full steam ahead within the confines of financial fair play to maximise their losses as far as they're allowed, because I can't believe that the Saudi authorities have gone through with this particular deal simply to finish 8th in the Premier League.
Thank you for that overdraft example. It's one of the few analogies I can actually relate to on this programme. The Newcastle situation, just one final question on this, and it came up in a conversation I had with my son yesterday, funny enough. We've seen with the current situation that oil prices have been severely, severely affected, and negative prices in some places. I presume the Saudis are immune to it. Is there a scenario whereby oil prices are affected so much that might have an impact on the money that Newcastle will have to spend, or are they simply just way too big, just immune from any financial pinprick?
Yeah, this is a short-term problem. What the Saudis have effectively done is that they've put money aside for a rainy day from the profits they've made from previous years. So they have got trillions, beyond billions, as in their bank account. An extra 5 or 10 million being spent by Newcastle, or even an extra 100 million being spent by Newcastle, simply just doesn't make the meter twitch at all. Right,
and also presumably transfer fees are going to be much lower than they were before this anyway. So even clubs who've got less money to play with are going to have, it's still going to go as far as it used to, isn't it?
Very much. It's going to be a buyer's market this summer, and Newcastle, I suspect, to be one of the beneficiaries. If you've got £150 million to spend, that might have got you 4 very good players 12 months ago. It could get you 6 or 7 in this transfer window.
Now, we've got a question from David Curd, who's a Liverpool fan. He's one of many people who picked up on something we talked about with a previous West Ham discussion. When we talked about the fact that the new stadium has 60,000 odd seats, the new West Ham stadium, but 54,000 season ticket holders, and quite a few people pointed out the fact that they thought there had to be a percentage of tickets available on a match day. So, for example, before the new stand was even built at Anfield, out of a capacity of 42,000, only 28,000 could be season ticket holders, because some tickets have to be available on a day for away fans, etc. So have those rules changed, or did we get it slightly wrong with the West Ham season ticket ratio?
No, the numbers in respect of West Ham are true. As far as away tickets are concerned, the home team has to make available the lower of 3,000 or 10% of capacity. So therefore, if you go to Bournemouth, you'll get 1,100 because they've only got 11,000 seater capacity. If you go to West Ham, it will be the lower is 3,000. The reason why West Ham sell 54,000 season tickets is simply because West Ham are not a tourist attraction. If you compare them to Liverpool, the reason why Liverpool only have 27,000 season tickets out of a capacity of 54,000 is they have a membership scheme. So I think you have to go and pay 25 or 30 quid to be a member, and then twice a year tickets for individual matches go on sale. Now, your membership does not guarantee you a ticket. It guarantees you a place in the queue for a ticket. And when this happens, it tends to kick off because the websites crash. You end up in huge queues. It makes Ocado deliveries look like a walk in the park, and it has caused a lot of resentment. But from Liverpool FC's point of view, it makes a lot more sense. If you're selling 27 or 30,000 match tickets for a home game, those fans are going to be the people that come once or twice a year. Well, what are they going to do? As soon as they get to Anfield, they head for the mega store, they get the shirt, they get the merchandise, and it's not even a £40 spend for the ticket. It's 150 quid spend because they've topped up on merchandise. Whereas if you compare that to West Ham, if you're a season ticket holder, what do you do when you get to a match? Well, you might buy yourself a pie and a pint. You're not buying any more merchandise. So in terms of, horrible word, monetisation of fans, Liverpool, and this is not a criticism of them because other clubs do it the same, Liverpool have a big tourist fan base, they have a big global fan base, and therefore they make sure that they relieve them as much money as possible because they attract so many more of them on an individual match day basis.
So David and I then have been labouring under the same misconception that, so apart from the away fans that have to be accommodated, there are no actual rules that say a certain percentage of tickets have to be available on the day for the casual fans. So you could, Sellers Park, for example, 26,000, say, take the 3,000 out for, we could have 23,000 season ticket holders. There's no regulation that says you have to have tickets. Oh, okay.
No, it's down to the club. It's the club's individual decision.
Well, that's really interesting, because I think that's one of those things that most football fans listening to this will be going, I didn't know that. That's why we're here. That's the sort of service we provide. And now, a final question comes from Austin. Just Austin. No first name, no last name. Austin is in Sydney, Australia. One of the few cities in the world where you always have to say the country. We very rarely say we've got a letter here from Moscow, Russia, but we always say Sydney, Australia. Austin is an ex-old Ipswich fan. And I suspect he may have been listening to last week's discussion about Ipswich and whether they're a good, attractive buy for new owners, potential new owners. You've touched on this. So Austin's question, I'll just read it out rather than try and improvise. I'm not a jazz presenter, am I? I don't know why I just don't look at the piece of paper. It's because I've clearly mixed up two pieces of paper and I'm trying to desperately do that off screen, which is only you looking. And you know me well enough to know I make mistakes, so I don't know why. Anyway, Austin's question. For potential buyers of clubs outside the Premier League, have we seen a shift in terms of which clubs might make more attractive investments? And if so, who would be the biggest climbers?
Practically every club outside of the Premier League, and indeed some in the Premier League, are realistically up for sale. Have there been climbers? Yes, because there are some owners who would sell the club for £1. So we saw Charlton effectively being sold for £1 in January. We discussed that on Thursday. I'm aware, and I can't go any further than this, is that there are some fairly big name clubs who are not too far away from administration. They have got genuine issues in struggling to pay the wages, and therefore, if somebody came in and offered £1 for the club, the present owner would say, take it with my blessing, because that means you're going to pay the next wage bill and the wage bill in May and June. Because frankly, I don't know whether I've got the money to do it. I'm asking people for loans. I'm trying to get investors involved in things of this nature. So there are a lot of very attractive clubs, and it is a buyer's market for football clubs as it is for players at present.
Now, are these clubs, just to clarify, are these clubs that would have been in trouble anyway, or is this purely coronavirus inflicted?
These clubs, the whole of the EFL is in a precarious position, apart from those clubs which are run well. And we'll be talking about Luton in a few minutes, one of the ones who are run well. And I think what it has made is that if you were in a danger zone, you're now totally at the edge of the lever of the meter in terms of being in the red. It's just accentuated what was already a problematic issue.
Okay, you mentioned Luton Town, so let's move on to this interview. Gary Sweet, the chief executive of Luton, was very keen to come on and chat to us. Unfortunately, his schedule was so tight, I wasn't available when he was, which didn't seem to bother him one jot, basically. So he was happy to chat to Kieran. So Mrs. Maguire, over there in Mayo, I'm just so you know, I'm not meant to be in this bit. So don't ever go at Kieran for hogging it. I'm not meant to be in this bit. So it's a really interesting interview. Take it away.
So I'm delighted that we're joined today by Gary Sweet, Chief Executive. Is that correct? Your correct title, Gary? Owner, Big Cheese, Chief Executive at Luton Town Football Club.
We call ourselves custodians. You know, we're never going to live as long as the life of the football club. Thankfully, that's
fantastic, and it's sort of to get that attitude from somebody who's involved at the top end of the game, because as an outside observer, sometimes it seems that their football clubs are just playthings. So yeah, I think somebody who understands the club from the position of Luton Town being an institution in the town, in the city, it is great. So first of all, Gary, how are you, and how is everybody at Luton in terms of health and support for the local community and the player and managers and all the staff?
I'm fine, thank you, and the family's great. Apart from a little bit of cabin fever with kids in the house, everybody who we speak to on a daily basis, I think health is fine. We're clearly seeing stories that seem to be getting a little bit closer every day. Of fatalities due to the virus, and support our supporters and friends and neighbours around the stadium, etc. All of those things happen around you, and you get to realise how real that situation is when it's personal.
Rightio, good. Well, it is traumatic times, football is living in a bubble, but it has to acknowledge the fact that it's part of a bigger society. So I thought we would sort of go through a few issues. You're in the football pyramid. You've done extremely well. Luton has come from non-league to the Championship, and that to me is sort of flown under the radar to a certain extent. How precarious are finances as far as you're concerned? In the Football League, you've been now through a variety of divisions, and you're now to a certain extent with some pretty big boys, Leeds United, West Brom, Middlesbrough, Forest, and so on. How are you finding life in the Championship?
Good, we're enjoying it. I mean, I think many of our supporters would probably say that we're a big boy too. And we were one of the founder members of the Premier League, and I think one of the reasons why that's gone under the radar, that rise from non-league as such, is because most people who do recognise Luton as probably a top 2 league football club, if you're probably over 30, 35 years old. I think the biggest challenge in that rise has been that scale at each step of financial that financial step up as such, and where most of our most football clubs' costs are really about players, and we're taking leaps into divisions that are shorter than players' contracts. That's always a challenge. It means you've got to, when you put a contract down and you write in, as we are, if we sign a player now that he might actually play in the Premier League, we've got to know what our Premier League budget is then. So 2 years ago, when we were signing players in League Two and we were putting down Championship numbers, it's very, very easy to say, well, that doesn't matter. We're not going to get there within the 2 years of your contract. So actually, but we've been sensible about that. But it's where a lot of clubs do fail. So we have struggled with that staging, that upscaling as such. And I think, though, the downscaling is possibly worse. So we're hoping to avoid that.
Right. I mean, I've looked at the numbers. I enjoy a spreadsheet or two. Looking at the total operational losses in the Championship, over £600 million, an average wage bill of 34 million. When you were promoted, did you look at those type of numbers and think, oh my God, yeah, this is going to be a huge challenge for us? Or was it just the excitement of being promoted and everything that went along with that?
No, never that. I mean, of course, we got excited as fans, as supporters. We are all supporters of the club. But no, I mean, I'm a bit of a spreadsheet geek as well. And I do my analysis, and, we do our analysis. It's not just me alone. And, we look at other clubs' performances, financial performance, and we are just purely determined to ensure that we block out completely what other clubs do. Actually, there is a best practice out there, but we like to think that our own practice is the best practice for us, not for everybody else, maybe not for anybody else, but our best practice is certainly best for us.
Right, and what does that best practice involve in terms of, are you looking long term? Do you have sort of a 1, 3, 5 year plan? Or how exactly does that manifest itself?
It's purely long term. I think the real question there is, what is long term in football? In some ways, you'd argue 2 weeks is. Certainly, in the last 4 weeks, we've seen football change beyond recognition. So how can you plan for that? Is impossible. It is impossible to plan for what's happened recently. But I think in terms of our long term vision is. Both based upon our ambition. So, for example, 2 years ago, we would have had a 2-year plan to get promoted twice, knowing that whatever we sign up to as a contract beyond that period, then it fits within our safe budgets. But it's also just keeping everything on quite a short leash. We don't really sign players for any more than 2 years. We rather rely on quite a dynamic approach to recruitment, and try to keep ourselves nimble there. Recruitment is absolutely key when in your financial management of your squad budget. So we're quite pleased with that. Every time we take that step up, that has to be slightly re-engineered, because you're looking at a different portfolio of players. But really, I think our focus is yes, have a look at what other clubs do, up the line, down the line. Have a look at what other clubs do. Have a look at how other clubs perform. Maybe learn from some of their best practice. But actually, we can often learn mostly on what they do wrong, and try to avoid those pitfalls. And that's really the only reason why we look at other clubs. Otherwise, it's just about, let's do things our way. Let's not necessarily follow the sheep within football, because I think it gets a lot wrong anyway, and try to be determined in sticking to that process.
Cool. Right. I mean, you mentioned sort of the sheep, and I understand where you're coming from. Do you, as an executive of a football club, do you feel under pressure from fans? Because if you take a look at what we seem to have between League One and the Championship, yourselves, Barnsley and Charlton were all promoted last season. You're now occupying the 3 relegation places. Have the fans bought into your ideal? I mean, certainly the feedback I get from Luton fans on social media is that they are totally committed to your business model, and they understand where you're coming from. There must always be a temptation to blow the budget, and you just have to be disciplined in yourself in that respect.
Well, firstly, I mean, I use the word sheep not in a derogatory term. I think there are clubs that we would say are sheep and do merely follow others, but there's a lot of brilliantly run football clubs out there, and so I just want to cover that off and not absolutely annoy everybody in the game, because I've got a lot of friends there. So, but do we have any temptation just to blow the budget and be over ambitious? Never. No. And do we feel pressure from supporters? No, not really. No, actually not at all. I think there's we've got a great relationship with our support base. I think we are supporters ourselves, and we want the same thing. And so the most pressure I feel is pressure I put on myself, or the pressure the board might put on me occasionally. The only pressure I think we are really under is really self-applied, and I think that yes, our supporters understand that. We as a club, in this respect, are fortunate enough to have a dreadful history of financial mismanagement. I say that in this sense because if we hadn't have had those periods of in the past 20 years when, in fact, actually, as far as I've supported the club, I remember, one of my first memories is I think back in 74 or 5, I said just a nipper just starting to support the club. We had to sell Peter Anderson to Anderlecht for 250,000 quid to survive. One of my first messages I had as a supporter of Luton Town was that, and so as like a 9-year-old, or I was like learning about your job almost, Kieran. Here, this is one of my first lessons in football. So, so I think Luton supporters absolutely understand that that we can't afford. We are not very, very wealthy individuals. I say that the board, those wonderful shareholders of ours that keep putting their hands in their pockets, they're not immensely wealthy individuals. So we're in this together, and that's the theme that we try to run within our culture at the club.
Looking at Luton, in terms of the development of the club, there has been talk about moving to a new stadium. Could you sort of just keep me up to date in terms of where you are with regards to that at present?
Well, actually, this is we're in a really good place actually. So we are we own our assets, which includes 2 pieces of land of around 60 acres. Those assets have been bought by our shareholders, so we have some internal debt within our shareholders. We have 2 companies under a single holding company. One, because the risk profiles, financial risk profiles, the 2 businesses of football and property development are completely separate. It's completely different. We have to separate those so they don't impact on each other, and there's a security there. But those board members, the same board members of Luton Town Football Club, have effectively loaned money for us to be able to buy that freehold land. So that is ours freehold. It has planning permission. It has now, after 3.5-4 years of challenging, we are clear of any challenge. It's uncontested, and we're free to go. What we don't have is the 600 odd million to build everything out. That's not the intention. The intention is to clearly develop those plans a little bit further and sell off packages in either in part or full, and the plans would effectively bring us a football stadium that the shareholders do not need to pay for and supporters don't need to pay for, but will be free. It will be contained in some kind of freehold form for the football club's use. So it affects, and actually, where the market is at the moment is the major concern. What's happening to retail in these days? What's happening? So we've got a number of things that we have within the jurisdiction, or in terms of usage status of within those planning applications, but we do have some flexibility there for change if when we come out of this period of calamity that we find ourselves looking at another use for something, then we can do that. So we've got quite a bit of flexibility there too. So that's our long-term safety net as such. It doesn't solve our short and medium-term problems. Of course, we need to get the football club there to that position. The property company doesn't really have a huge amount of ongoing cost, other than the cost of our consultants to develop those plans. So it's in a good place. That clearly we're going to see a delay in the process through this, but we hope it won't be too long a delay. And we're pleased to see that in other areas, the development market is still continuing. Government's plans to continue with obviously the big rail contracts, the Crossrail particularly, and HS2, I think are encouraging. It means long term that market is still going to be lively, and particularly in the housing sector, which is in desperate need, particularly in places like Luton, where we need more residential properties. They're all very healthy.
That's good. That's good to hear. In terms of Luton are presently are in the Championship. We've seen the effective shutdown of the lower leagues in Scotland, Belgium, the Dutch National League, that's closed down. And there has been talk this week of clubs in League One and League Two effectively cancelling the season. I was watching Sky Sports this morning with Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville, and they were certainly intimating that it was an option which hadn't been really on the table, but does appear to be coming closer and closer. What's your view in terms of this issue of sporting integrity versus the potential survival, and what do you see as the benefits of closing the season? Clearly as fans, we're all going stir crazy. We're desperate to see some football, but what's your perspective of things, and how do you think that could manifest itself potentially in the Championship?
I think you said a lot there in a nutshell, actually. We find ourselves as chief execs of football clubs effectively acting like politicians at the moment. The government will have a massive, great big dial in front of it, which will, as we come out of lockdown, they'll need to switch that dial between the survival, effectively the economy of the country, and the public health, so the safety of the nation. So and that is something that will constantly go on. And I think we're in the same position here. I think from a moral, ethical point of view, I think it's right to cancel the season, probably. As long as whilst there is any kind of safety risk on those taking part, or if there is any increased resource on the NHS, these are the key things that concern me. And I've written to the Football League to make my point on that actually, as a club, we really do not want to play games. We don't want to take part in the remainder of the season unless we've got some commitments, we've got some form of comfort in terms of that we're not taking testing kits away from the NHS, that actually we're not putting a further burden on the NHS by playing games behind closed doors. But if we've got those some element of comfort on that there, particularly if we're playing at Kenilworth Road, then I see no reason why we can't continue. The show must go on. I think there is, the further down you go, down the pyramid you go, there's more of an argument to say that the season could and should be cancelled. I'm not saying I haven't taken part in those League One, League Two debates, so it'd be unfair for me to say what I would do if we were a League One club. But I would probably err on the side of cancellation. But I think I flip over to let's keep the show on the road in the Championship while we possibly can, as long as those safety issues can be dealt with.
And would you be willing to sort of play in a sort of a sterilised hub if the EFL say, well, we're going to use 3 or 4 grounds in the country simply because it's from a health and safety perspective, and clearly that does take priority. It's going to be a surreal environment, even playing at Kenilworth Road before an empty crowd. So, would you be willing to go to, if everything takes place at St Andrews and one in the northwest and one in the southeast and so on? Would that be acceptable to you in your position?
I think more than acceptable. I would prefer it. I think what, as clubs, we have to think about here is how do we, we're not experts in this. We're nowhere near. I mean, how do we set up our stadium to manage a behind closed doors game where people have to socially distance, and where those not playing, and where you have to have testing environments, where you have to have clean environments. We've got a 117-year-old stadium now, so how we get that fit for purpose, it isn't something that I should ever be asked a question about, so actually I'm all in favour of actually putting the remaining games, Championship games, into 2 or 3 venues, securing those, making sure that in this, look, we're football, sort of genuine football supporters. We love a live atmosphere. We love a live game. But this is one of those times where you have to switch completely to a broadcast environment. So where we can actually set camera positions up, 16 camera positions. You can get your LED boards around, so you can still sell advertising. Try to look at areas where we can bring in as much as income as possible to recover those losses we're going to make. And you can create a little bit of a mini tournament around that kind of atmosphere, and I think that's probably the best solution for me.
That sounds very reasonable, and I think as a fan, I can't see any fans objecting if your position from an executive is positive. And also, it would, of course, reduce the number of outside broadcast camera crews that would be required. So, again, from a social distancing point of view, once they get that all set up, presumably they've got the wherewithal to do a lot of that remotely. I think that there's got to be some positives from that.
But the most important thing with that, Kieran, as well, that if you take St George's Park, for example, you can make St George's Park, a very, very safe and secure environment for players to, and staff to get tested, to have all their medical needs attended to instantly, immediately on site. You can contain everything within that environment, and that's the most important thing for me.
And absolutely, and it's great to see that the health issues are taking a priority, which is completely appropriate. Just sort of one final question. You've been involved in football for a while now. From the boardroom perspective, if there was sort of one or two things you'd like to see changed, what would your wish list be to make the sport more sustainable? And I'm not saying changing rules. Not nothing to do with VAR of that nature. But I think there is a concern from many people that perhaps the game in certain leagues has been living beyond its means for a while too long. Certainly, when I look at the numbers and I go back season by season, I go, well, it's not 2019 that's the problem. If I go through the whole of the decade of what's been happening, the level of spending in terms of player costs has exceeded income, certainly in the Championship. So how do you think, is there a solution, or ultimately, because of the diverse nature of ownership, is that just unrealistic wishfulness on my behalf?
Well, I think it was unrealistic, and I mean, we've always harboured thoughts on how football could be improved at Luton. I mean, we are, I think, in many ways, the game is really on a very, very fast track to becoming quite morally bankrupt in many ways. Actually, I think it needs to clean its act up. I think financially, as we're seeing now, it's probably not far off being financially bankrupt unless changes happen. And so we're the one thing, not that we should ever be thankful of a virus pandemic hitting our country, but the one positive you can take out of this is that this is a genuine opportunity for us to completely reset the game. And there are clubs looking at it and discussing it. The league do have to take it on board. So I think apart from the obvious things of the distribution of wealth coming into the game has to be more even spread. It has to be fairer for the pyramid to survive. The one thing that we have in the English game that I think every other nation is jealous of is that pyramid. No other country plays football at the 6th or 7th step down, where you have players that are professional. You have players that are earning the amount of money they are, and which isn't wrong at that level necessarily, by the way. But you have supporters and communities following clubs at that level that are so important fabric elements of their societies and communities. And so, this is the one thing in every other country that they're so jealous of, and it's the one thing that we have to protect. And a redistribution of funding throughout will seek to protect that, and that's one thing we've got to try and take on board. Of course, we're going to need the Premier League's assistance to do that. But the other thing as well, there's been a lot of talk. I mean, look at the financial fair play and profit and sustainability, or loss and sustainability levels that I would say that are in the Championship at the moment. It's a basket case of a league, absolute basket case. When we get promoted from League One to the Championship, for us to be looking at the stark reality of how clubs are overspending is just preposterous. And they know my view, they know our view on this. It is absolutely preposterous. And maybe right now, they're beginning to rue the decisions of overspending, because that's going to really hurt them at the moment. On that basis, I would absolutely look at bringing in a form of salary cap or budget cap on players throughout the leagues, throughout our 3 leagues. I would absolutely look to. I wouldn't necessarily stop anybody, from overspending if they can genuinely afford to do that. But they would have to put down warrants for if they're signing players on a 4-year contract. It's not just about this year; it's about the 4 years. And I would perhaps, if they do go over a budget, bring in some kind of levy that gets redistributed amongst other clubs that enables that division to be more sustainable together. And that way, there's a little bit more harmony within the group as well. I mean, one thing I have said is the further up the levels you go, the less friendly the football gets. We loved our time in the conference because of that. You know, that everybody feels like they're in it together. Whereas right now, you know, the championship, I think it's improved slightly, but there was a time whereas actually they were tearing each other apart. You know, championship meetings were just dreadful. You know, not quite food fights, but you know, it wasn't a pleasant environment, Kieran. You know, and so, you know, just if there was that redistribution of overspending, then that would probably create a little bit more harmony too. And I'd scrap VAR.
You scrap VAR. Okay, great to hear. Gary, thank you so much for your time. I'm hugely appreciate it. We're putting this out soon. Just hoping the technology has worked. As we are, myself and Kevin are quite legendary in our inability to do anything correctly. But thank you again, and stay safe, stay indoors, and good luck to everybody for Luton for the rest of this season. You know, because ultimately, I'm sure you want to see your lads playing football again as a fan.
Well, we believe actually we honestly believe we would have and will stay up. You know, I think we're on a really good run of form actually, and we got a great bunch of lads. I just need them to accept a salary cut now. That's all, and they'll be heroes in my eyes again. But I mean, we've got a great bunch of lads. They need to play 9 more games, and I think we're very, very confident we'll be here next year.
Terrific. Well, good luck to everybody, and thank you so much.
And Ashley, just a word to thank you, because you that one of the questions you asked earlier about how we monitor other clubs. You're a very, very useful resource for that. So we really appreciate your tweets and your knowledge. So thanks. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Cheers. Thank you,
Kieran. That was really, really interesting, really honest, and I think as well what was fascinating was his long-term approach, wasn't it?
Very much so. You know, he wants Luton Town to be around in 5, 10, 20 years. By building a new stadium, you know, they can increase capacity, they can increase income. And his approach is that he's a fan, and as a fan, you want the club to be there on your dying day. And that's his approach too. Yep. He's not gambling. He's not twisting on 19 like some other owners. And he didn't name anybody, but it's quite clear that there were practices which he didn't particularly approve of in some of the other clubs. I've got to say, I was very impressed. I'm not quite sure what I said to him that influenced any decisions, but within 24 hours, he'd sacked the manager.
Well, do you know what, Kieran? Within 24 hours of any public view, I'm making irrational decisions all over the place. I don't know what it is. You get in people's minds. You got a bloke in Blackburn called Entwistle who's doing his own spreadsheets now. Before we finished, I was only half joking when I said at the start that people do want to talk to you, and I'm actually quite proud of the fact that people in football seem to think we're giving not just the fan a voice, but certainly people who work in financial administration seem to understand that you're there to maybe articulate things that even they can't do in a sense, and also you've got slightly more freedom to name names than they have. So it's good that you're helping people who are having a really hard time making ends meet with a football club and trying to get our clubs through this situation can come to you for a bit of spreadsheet fun and games.
Well, I wouldn't quite go that far, but what was very clear was that it is a tough job because you've got no money coming in, you've got a wage bill to pay, and you've got the responsibility of being the club chief executive at this very testing time, and everybody agrees, and Gary was very much keen to get this message across, is that health matters. Football is a non-issue at present. Yep,
absolutely. Well, on that note, this is meant to be the shorter pod, the Monday pod, but in the circumstances, people need something to listen to, so it doesn't really matter, does it? Those days of listening on the tube, they're gone for the moment. Well, I can't wait to get back to the 15 minutes so people can moan about the fact it was finished before I got to Charing Cross. The Price of Football is a DAP production. If you have questions for us, and remember Mondays are our special question day, except when we get clever interviews like this one, questions@priceoffootball.com, and we will see you again on Thursday. Take care.
Thank you. And can I just have a special shout out for Chris, because he's a big fan of the show and his mum and dad live next door to me. And he went and bought me some Marks and Spencer's giant buttons, which are my favourite chocolate. And he left it because we live too far away from M&S, so we don't go far outside of the house these days as a result of the lockdown. And he'd heard they were my favourite, and he's brought me some. And thank you so much, Chris.
Well done, Chris. That's very kind of you. I'll drop you my address, see if they can go through the post. Not my favourite, but let's not. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kieran.
Cheerio, folks.
The price of football. The price of football.